It's finally May, and to me that means tomato season. So today let's go over my 5 basic tips for how to make sure you grow your tomatoes successfully. This first tip is all about location and where you actually plant your tomatoes. Now this is something I actually don't hear people talk about very often, but tomatoes do need full sun. Most of you probably already know that. But full sun kind of has this loose definition of 6 to 8 hours. So when it comes to actually choosing where you want to plant your tomatoes, and let's just say hypothetically, you have a slicing tomato and a cherry tomato. Your slicing tomato is going to be the one that really wants full sun. I'm talking from sun up to sun down. That'll be the preferred option for those big tomatoes because that big fruit requires a lot of energy to produce and actually to taste sweet and delicious. So those big slicing tomatoes, you're gonna wanna prioritize into the sunniest spot of your garden. Now, the cherry tomatoes don't need as much energy to produce and create sweet fruit because they're much smaller, so it takes a shorter period of time, a little less energy to produce that fruit. So you can actually put that in a location that gets a little bit more shade. You still want that like 6 to 8 hour minimum, but the big boys are just not going to taste good or even really produce very well if you put them somewhere where they only get 8 hours of sun. So let's say hypothetically, I only have these 2 beds. I want to plant my big tomatoes and my small tomatoes. I would put all my big tomatoes on this side and all my cherry tomatoes on this side. And that's because behind me is south, that way is west. So as the sun crosses over the sky, the morning light's going to hit both beds. At noon, it's going to hit both beds. And then in the afternoon, these bigger tomatoes are gonna get full sun and cast a dappled shadow onto the cherry tomatoes. That's totally fine. These are still going to get enough sunlight to produce plenty of fruit, but the big slicers, they need and want that full day of sun. So you wanna make sure that if you are limited on space and you have to choose where to put things, put your big slicing tomatoes in the sunniest spot and put your cherry tomatoes either behind them or somewhere where it gets a little bit less sun. Now, full sun is still going to produce the best tomato. So if you have the option, try to put both in as much sun as you can. But this is a good way to optimize your space if you are limited by that. So next, let's talk about pruning, suckers, and that's probably enough for the next tip. Airflow is the secret to healthy tomatoes. If you don't have good airflow, you will get disease, you'll get powdery mildew, fungal diseases, things like that, which will make you really sad. So let's talk about how to prune and my approaches to pruning. This isn't the pruning all the way through the season. This is what you do early on in the season when you first put your tomatoes in. There are a couple things that you always wanna make sure you do. The first of which is that you remove any leaves that are touching the soil or the surface of your bed. And I'll show you why. When this leaf is sitting here, touching the soil, a roly-poly could come up, chew on the leaves, create holes, and then when the wind blows, it's gonna rub up against the soil, and that's how you get diseases transferred into your leaf. So the soil is kind of the disease vector for tomatoes, or at least one of the primary ones. So keeping the leaves off the ground is a good way to make sure that it doesn't catch it. The other thing I like to do, depending on your mood and how you actually trellis the tomatoes, is remove suckers. In this case, I have a single stem trellis, which means that I only really have this one string to support the entire plant. So if I let it grow all of its suckers, that means that I'm not gonna have any way to support it. It's gonna flop over and break. And right here where you see the string wrapped really tightly around the stem, that is the main stem, or single leader as it's also known when grown this way. So what is the sucker? If we trace the stem up to a leaf node, let me actually remove this leaf so you can see a little bit more. If you trace it up, you'll get to this junction where the main leaf comes out, and in that little crotch is a little sucker. So this right here is a sucker. When people say pinch the sucker, you're literally pinching it with your fingers to remove it. So now I've removed this sucker, I could get rid of it. But if we keep going up, there's actually a much larger sucker. When they get to this size, they start getting pretty thick, close to like a pencil. That's when you're gonna wanna actually prune it away. So I'm gonna take my pruners here, which I just sharpened. I'm gonna snip this, and now I've removed that sucker. The reason why we wanna remove the suckers in this case is because we don't want this to bush out. If it bushes out, I can't really support it because there's only a single string. So what can you do with the sucker now that you removed it? Well, you could throw this in a cup of water, it'll root, and now you have a clone of this exact plant. So in this case, I have the sun gold. I could put this in a cup of water. Once it grows some roots, I could plant it out and I'll have a second sun gold. Now, there is a time where you don't want to remove the suckers. So let's go take a look at that example right now. So in this side of the garden, I have my tomatoes set up on a Florida weave trellis system. That's where I have these T-posts and some strings that come every so often and pull the tomatoes together to stop them from flopping over. In this system, I can actually support a lot of suckers, and that's because I'm essentially keeping it in a plane by putting all these strings that capture the tomato plants, keep them in check, and support the entire plant. So if I do have a sucker grow out from here, eventually a string will come capture it and it won't flop over and break. That's the beauty of the Florida weave, is that it's very forgiving when it comes to actually pruning, but the same rules apply. Any leaf that touches the ground needs to go. Any early suckers I will also probably remove, because I want to give this at least a foot off the ground of pure airflow. Remember, airflow is really what keeps your tomatoes healthy. So even though this can support suckers, I don't want to create too many early on, because I want that early airflow at the beginning of the season where it might be a little more humid and chances of disease are a little higher. Later, as I get into the drier part of the year, I will let more suckers grow because the disease issue won't be as prevalent. So that's kind of the way to think about it. You want airflow, you want to reduce disease, and you want to keep everything off the surface of your planting medium or soil or however you're growing your tomato. You just don't want any leaves touching the ground, and you will probably want to remove some of those early suckers. So now, let's talk about the next tip, which you will find very interesting. This next tip might trigger some of you, and that's because I'm watering my tomatoes overhead and getting the leaves wet. A lot of people say that you cannot do this because your tomato will instantly succumb to diseases and die. But guess what? This morning it rained, so my tomatoes got wet. I can't do anything about that. It rains everywhere around the world, and tomatoes don't just die when they get their leaves wet. Now, there is a chance that you will get a higher proportion of disease if they stay wet for too long. So really, when it comes to watering, it's all about when you do it. Right now, it's early morning, almost noon, and getting the leaves wet is no big deal because it has all day to dry off. Now, if it was sunset and I came through and watered these, yes, that would be worse because they would sit wet and cold overnight. And again, it can rain overnight and you can't do anything about that, but you just want to try to minimize it. The more important thing is that you keep mulch on your soil, because what happens is when you water, there's a chance that if you're using especially an aggressive watering wand, that the soil can splash up, get on your tomato leaves, and that's where the disease transfer can really occur. So when it comes to watering, try to water earlier in the morning if your leaves are gonna get wet. Try to make sure that you always have mulch to reduce the chance of splash up. And when you do water, water deeply. You don't wanna just come through every day and hit it with a little spritz of water. You wanna really, really soak the ground, let the water percolate down deep so that the roots go down deep and create a more resilient tomato. So don't just come every day, give them a little splash. Try to do a deep watering either once or a couple times a week, depending on how hot it is. So let's now talk about actually planting the tomatoes. We'll step back in time a little bit, and I'll share with you a couple tips that are kind of important to keep in mind of when you actually do plant your tomatoes. Let's talk about planting tomatoes and how to actually plant them and a couple different options that maybe you haven't seen before. Now, most people will always say, including myself, that you should plant tomatoes deeply so that you get more roots. So if I plant it literally up to here, all of this will produce roots over time. Now, the problem is, if you live somewhere that's a little bit cooler, it takes a long time for spring to warm up. If you bury your tomato that deep, down here, the soil is going to be quite cold and your tomato is not going to be a happy camper. So let's dig out a test pit here. This power planter's really convenient for tomatoes in particular. So I got a pretty deep hole there. So the idea is that you can take this and go all the way down like that. If I buried this, all those roots will grow. Now, if you do live somewhere where the soil might be too cold, you do have another option to get more roots. And actually, this is a good way to use a tomato that maybe is a little bit leggy, like this guy's a little bit long, honestly. So what you could do instead is take a trowel, dig a channel like so. And then what you're gonna do is actually take your tomato and just lay it down in there. What this is going to do is the same thing. You're gonna get plenty of rooting along the stem because that stem will be buried. And it's not quite as much burial just because of the awkward logistics of laying a tomato down flat, but it's already pointed up. And now what will happen is over the next 2 days, the sunlight will come past it through and this tomato will start leaning itself upright to capture more of the sun's energy. It'll naturally fix itself in the right orientation, but at the beginning it'll look a little bit funny. The advantage of this is that now you have all that stem buried, but it's very close to the surface where the soil is nice and warm, and it's gonna create a wider root spread. So this is totally a viable option. Again, especially if you live somewhere cold, this is the way I would plant my tomatoes deeply if I were you. I like to think of tomatoes as social plants. They like to have companions and things next to them to help them grow better. So when it comes to planting tomatoes, I never like to just plant tomatoes. You've seen in every single bed that I've shown you tomatoes, I either have flowers, peppers, or other things alongside them. So in this bed, I have determinate tomatoes. That is tomatoes that grow for a determined period of time, set all their fruit, and then ripen at once, harvest it, and you pull the plant out. Just because they're determinate doesn't mean that they don't want companions either, even if their life is a little bit short-lived. So some of my favorite companions are marigolds, because marigolds do a really good job of deterring some pests. Specifically, they can actually help with things like root knot nematode, which I actually suffered from last year. So I'm definitely including some marigolds. So right here is a great spot to throw a marigold. It'll also allegedly help deter aphids, but I don't know if that's really that true. I do know that it can help with that nematode problem though, so I definitely want to make sure I include it. The other great option that's also edible is basil. So over here I have some basil that I could put in, but I'm actually going to put it elsewhere. Basil is nice and aromatic. It helps deter pests. It creates these nice flowers if you let it bloom. It will also attract pollinators. So that's a great option. And also it's next to your tomatoes now. So it's very easy to cook up a nice tomato sauce or make a nice caprese salad with fresh basil and tomatoes. Just makes sense to put them next to each other. The last one that I really absolutely love and will put everywhere in the garden is alyssum. Right here I have a nice little purple white alyssum, and in these beds over here I have giant mounds of alyssum. Alyssum is really great at attracting these little parasitic wasps, and those wasps are also good pollinators, but more importantly, there are predators. They can attack things like aphids, eat them, and importantly, they will parasitize and kill tomato hornworms for you. So not only will it make your bed look better, the tomatoes will grow better, they'll be healthier, but they'll also actually secretly be protecting your tomato plants. So hopefully all these tips will help you grow wonderful tomatoes this year. I can't wait to start harvesting them. It's my absolute favorite thing to grow every year. Nothing tastes better than a homegrown garden tomato. So best of luck to you guys out there. And if you have any other questions about tomatoes, definitely drop them in the comments and I'll be sure to reply.